the first thing you hear at Pelican Bay isn't shouting. It's silence so deep it feels like a weight. Then the noise comes, metal doors slamming, keys jangling, the echo of boots on concrete. On this morning, the silence breaks for a reason no one expected. In the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, a red light starts flashing above a cell door. An alarm blares. Officers rush down the tier. Inside one of the most secure blocks in California, something has gone wrong. A door that should have stayed locked isn't fully latched. An inmate has slipped an arm through the slot and grabbed a guard's sleeve. For a split second, the guard is pulled toward the bars. Other officers run in. Radios crackle. The corridor fills with tension. Then the sound cuts. The camera light turns steady green again. The door clanks shut. But the whole tier is awake now, hearts racing, wondering, how could this happen here, in a place built to be escape-proof? To understand that moment, you have to step back. Pelican Bay State Prison was built in 1989 at the far edge of California near Crescent City. It was designed from the ground up to hold the state's most violent offenders and powerful gang leaders, men who had turned older prisons into command centers for crime. Lawmakers and architects promised a place so controlled that even whispers between cells would be impossible. That promise became the SHU, a block of windowless pods, single cells, and long empty corridors patrolled by cameras. Prison officials called it a model for Supermax confinement. Civil rights lawyers called it a concrete box for the human mind. From the outside, Pelican Bay looks like a fortress sitting on the edge of tall pines and cold ocean winds. Rows of razor-wire crown-high fences. Watchtowers rise above barren yards. Inside, the design is all lines and angles. Each SHU cell is about 8 feet by 10 feet with a solid steel door. Meals slide in through a slot. Recreation means an hour alone in a small outdoor pen with high walls and a slice of sky. Inmates spend 22 to 23 hours a day inside. There are no group classes, no contact visits, and almost no noise. Many of the men housed here were validated as gang leaders under California's old policies. They were moved to the SHU not for one crime inside but to cut off their influence on the outside. Some stayed for years or decades. Lawsuits and hunger strikes later revealed the toll this took: depression, anxiety, hallucinations. In 2015, after a long court fight known as Ashker versus Governor, California agreed to limit indefinite solitary confinement. But in the years before that settlement, Pelican Bay's SHU was the blueprint for maximum control. On a normal day the tier runs like a machine. Doors open and shut on a timer. Officers call names for legal mail. Inmates create small routines, push-ups, reading, writing letters. One former prisoner described it in an interview as living in a bathroom with your mind as your only company. Another called the outdoor pen a dog run with a view of clouds. Guards also live by the clock, walking the same routes, watching the same screens, logging every movement. There are highs even here. A letter from family. A court win. A new book arriving after months. And there are lows, bad news from home, another year added to your time in the SHU, or a medical scare that draws every officer on the tier. Some inmates try to create art with pencil stubs. Some memorize entire books. Some talk through air vents, their voices thin as paper. The contrast between the vast forest outside and the tiny cell inside is part of the prison's legend. That morning started with the usual calm. A tray slid through a slot. The smell of coffee filled a few cells. An officer checked each door. Cameras showed nothing out of place. Then, in one cell on the lower tier, an inmate known for years of silence did something no one expected. He reached through the food port just as an officer approached with the tray. His hand clamped onto the officer's sleeve, yanking with sudden force. The officer shouted. Radios crackled. Other staff sprinted down the corridor, shields raised. The cell door clanged as they hit the emergency override. The inmate let go and retreated, hands raised, but the moment had already happened. For a heartbeat, the prison's perfect order had a crack in it. In the control booth above, a supervisor slammed a button to lock every door. Red light spun over the tier. Inmates pressed their faces to the tiny windows, eyes wide. The guard who'd been grabbed stood breathing hard, sleeve torn, looking at the door that had nearly pulled him inside. Everyone knew how rare and dangerous even a small breach could be here. The alarm cut out. The red light slowed. Officers regrouped, checking each cell. The inmate sat on his bunk, staring at the wall, saying nothing. A nurse appeared at the far end with a kit, checking the officer's arm for scratches. The control room voice announced, "Unit secured. Resume protocol." But the air stayed tight, like the whole building was still holding its breath. Pelican Bay had been built to stop exactly this kind of contact. How had it happened? Was it a slip of timing? A fault in the door? A new tactic? Officers would file reports. Cameras would be reviewed. But on that morning, in California's most notorious prison, one small act had shaken the image of total control. The supervisor in the booth leaned into the microphone. "All staff remain at posts. Possible incident under review. No movement until further notice." The words echoed down the tier. Inmates pulled back from their windows. The officer who'd been grabbed flexed his arm once, then walked to the end of the corridor without a word, and in a cell 3 doors down, another inmate sat quietly, watching everything through the slit in his door. He had been in the SHU for 10 years. He had seen hunger strikes, cell extractions, and long nights of silence. But this moment felt different. He lowered his head and began to write something on a scrap of paper. No one noticed as he folded the paper into a tiny square. He held it in his palm and waited for the next round. The alarm might be off, but the story inside Pelican Bay was only just beginning. The tier was still locked down from the incident when the shift changed. Red lights no longer flashed, but the air in the SHU felt thicker, like a storm waiting to break. The officer who had been grabbed had gone to medical for a check. In his cell, the silent inmate stared at the wall. 3 doors down, the man with the folded paper waited for footsteps. A new officer walked the tier slowly, sliding mail through the slots. When he reached the 3rd cell, a tiny folded square slipped back out with the tray. It was wrapped in a thin thread like a fishing line. Before the officer noticed, the square zipped under the door across the tier to another cell. A hand caught it. Inside that cell, an older prisoner opened the paper. The message was only 2 words, written in block letters: "Count time." He burned it over a toilet flame, the smoke curling up toward the vent. In the control booth above, a camera blinked and zoomed, but the movement was so quick it didn't catch the pass. This was the other side of Pelican Bay that most people never see. The prison was built for control, but inside it still lives a network of coded messages, glances, and routines. Gang kites sent cell to cell on strings, names whispered through vents. Officials call it passing notes. Inmates call it survival. The lockdown meant no yard time, no showers, no movement. Officers walked in pairs now, shields on their backs. Inmates filled the long hours by pacing or doing push-ups. A few tapped messages through the plumbing. The sound of tapping was like a slow heartbeat under the concrete. Officer Harris returned to the tier for the evening count. He stopped at each cell and looked the men in the eye. At Daniel's old cell, now empty after his transfer, hoped the plant would have been gone. Here in Pelican Bay there were no plants, no paper cups. Harris knew every name, every face. He also knew how thin the line was between order and chaos. From the booth a voice said, "Resume food service." Trays slid in. The inmate who had grabbed the officer pushed his tray back untouched. Across the tier, another man stood with his hands on the wall, breathing slow, eyes closed. High above the SHU, the sky went from pale blue to gray. Gulls circled in the distance over the Pacific. The cold ocean wind swept through the razor wire and down the concrete walls. Inside, the air stayed still. Then, just after dinner, an alarm tripped again. This time it wasn't a door or a grab. It was the roof sensor above the corridor, a sensor that had never gone off in 5 years. The control booth voice went sharp. "All units hold. Roof alert zone C, confirm camera." Officers froze. Cameras panned. A